Like, comment, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that rattled the halls of the Galactic Council itself. This isn't propaganda, it isn't rumor. It began with a single man, a campfire, and a choice no other species dared make. The frontier world of Duranth was a place most civilized folk avoided. The air was thick with biting spores, the forests crawled with creatures whose venom could melt armor, and every shadow seemed to move. To the Galactic Council, it was a quarantine world, labeled red on every star map. But for Elias Kane it was just another contract. Elias wasn't a hero. Not anymore. He'd been a Marine once, proud in his uniform, carrying the flag of Earth into battles that weren't always worth fighting. His service ended in disgrace when he refused an order that would have slaughtered innocents. The council branded him unreliable, unfit for command, unworthy of the discipline he once lived by. So he drifted to the colonies, taking whatever jobs came his way: survey runs, salvage missions, guard duty, and forgotten outposts. It didn't matter what, so long as it paid enough to keep him moving. That night, he'd set up camp on the edge of a deep ravine, the fire snapping against the cold. His rations were meager, but he knew how to stretch them. He'd survived worse than hunger. The sounds of the forest were endless: chittering, screeches, and the low thrumming calls of predators far larger than anything Earth had ever spawned. Elias had learned to tune it out. But then came the sound that froze him, the ragged, pained growl of something massive struggling through the brush. His hand went to the rifle at his side before he even realized it. The firelight caught a glint of scales, then the monstrous form stepped into view. It was the kind of creature recruits whispered about in barracks, the kind the council plastered across posters to remind citizens of the dangers lurking beyond civilized space. Nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, body rippling with muscle, its hide patterned in shifting black and violet that let it blur with the night. Its eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, slitted and hungry. A shadow fong. Apex predator of Duranth. Killer of hunters. Breaker of armies. And it was wounded. A jagged shard of metal jutted from its flank, and dark ichor dripped steadily from the wound. Every breath came ragged, like stone grinding against stone. Yet even injured, its presence was overwhelming. Elias kept the rifle leveled, heart pounding so hard it felt like the whole forest could hear it. He'd seen recordings of these things tearing armored vehicles open like tin cans. If it lunged, he wouldn't even have time to scream. The rational part of him screamed to fire, to burn through its skull before it closed the gap. But another thought slid between the cracks of fear. The council's orders were simple: kill predators. Always. No exceptions. Yet watching this beast, Elias couldn't help but feel the echo of himself in it, wounded, outcast, left to die in the dirt. His fingers trembled against the trigger. And then, against every scrap of training drilled into him, he lowered the rifle. The shadow fong staggered a step closer, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of food. Elias's rations lay just beside the fire, sealed in their dull gray packets. He swallowed hard, tore one open, and tossed the chunk of dried meat toward the beast. It landed in the dirt between them. For a moment nothing happened. The predator's chest heaved, eyes fixed on him. Then it lowered its massive head, sniffed, and devoured the offering in a single crunch. The sound was loud enough to make Elias flinch, but the creature didn't move closer. He dared another risk. From his medkit, he pulled a small injector filled with coagulant foam. Slowly, so slowly, he crouched and slid it across the ground. The predator's gaze followed the motion. After a moment that stretched like eternity, it lowered itself onto one haunch, pressed its wound against the foam, and hissed as the compound sealed the bleeding. Elias exhaled only then, realizing he'd been holding his breath. They sat like that for minutes, or was it hours? The human and the predator, the fire casting long shadows across both. The forest seemed quieter now, as if even the lesser creatures had realized something was shifting. Finally, Elias spoke, though he knew it was madness. "Guess you're not ready to die yet." "Neither am I." His voice was steady, but beneath it was the unspoken truth. If the creature decided he looked tastier than the rations, he was finished. The predator made no move. It watched him, those glowing eyes unblinking. Then it lowered its head fully to the ground, resting beside the fire like some colossal hound. Elias stared in disbelief. He almost laughed, except the sound would have broken whatever fragile peace had formed. He forced himself to relax his grip on the rifle, to lean back against his pack, though his heart still hammered. Sleep would not come easy, but the fire's warmth and the sheer exhaustion of the day weighed him down. As his eyes drifted shut, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. The thought was absurd. he was lying beside a monster that could swallow him whole. Yet the calm was real, undeniable. Above, hidden in the branches, a faint red glow blinked. A council drone hovered silently, its lens recording every detail, the human lowering his weapon, feeding the Shadow Fang, watching it lie down at his side. The data streamed instantly to orbit, then across the relay network, bound for the heart of galactic civilization. In the council chambers, alien elders would watch this footage and argue, panic, rage. They would demand explanations their logic could not provide. Predators were not supposed to be tamed. Humans were not supposed to break rules no other species dared bend. But Elias Kane knew none of this. He only knew that when dawn came, the Shadow Fang would still be there waiting. And against reason, against every warning he'd ever heard, he found himself wondering what it might be like to share another meal with it. The fire crackled. The forest breathed. The predators slept. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The morning sun broke over the ridges of Duranth, bleeding orange across the thick canopy. Elias woke to the weight of a gaze on him. Nyx, though he had not yet given the creature that name, was still there. The Shadowfang's body coiled on the far side of the dying fire, its wound sealed with hardened foam, its chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths. For a moment Elias wondered if he had dreamt the night before. Yet when the beast shifted, stretching like some colossal cat, reality pressed its weight down again. He forced himself upright, body stiff from a night of half-sleep, rifle never leaving arm's reach. He should have left while it slumbered. He should have taken the valley path, radioed his employers, and pretended this encounter never happened. That was the smart move, the safe move. But when he reached for his pack, the Shadow Fang stirred, its head snapping up, eyes narrowing with an alertness too sharp to be coincidence. Elias froze. Its lips peeled back, not in hunger but warning. The forest around them seemed to throb with a low vibration, the calls of distant predators silenced all at once. Elias realized it wasn't watching him but the treeline. Something out there had noticed the wounded alpha, and it had come to test its luck. From the undergrowth slunk a smaller predator, not a Shadow Fang but another breed of hunter common to these woods. Leaner, faster, scavengers that swarmed wounded giants in hopes of dragging them down. Its eyes glimmered, its claws digging into the earth as it circled. Elias's rifle snapped up, finger brushing the trigger. The Shadow Fang rumbled so deep Elias felt it through the ground. In that instant Elias made a decision. He fired, not at the Shadow Fang, not even to scare it, but straight into the scavenger's chest. The shot cracked the dawn silence, and the smaller beast collapsed in a heap. Smoke curled from the barrel as Elias lowered the weapon. The Shadow Fang's gaze returned to him, unblinking, unreadable. He half expected it to finish him then, but instead the creature stepped forward, sniffed the dead scavenger and tore into it with a snap of jaws. When it finished, blood painting its muzzle, it turned back to him. A sound came from its throat, something between a growl and a chuff, almost like acknowledgement. Elias exhaled, his nerves electric. He had crossed a line. He had chosen a side. Days passed and the choice grew heavier. The Shadow Fang followed him now, limping at first but regaining strength quickly. Each evening Elias made camp, and each evening the predator lingered just beyond the firelight until he tossed it a strip of ration or a cut from his latest hunt. Soon it no longer waited. It lay at the fire's edge, its vast body curled in the warmth, its ears twitching at every sound. Elias found himself speaking to it, half to test his sanity, half because silence weighed too heavy. He spoke of Earth, the oceans he hadn't seen in years, the smell of rain on concrete, the chatter of city streets. He spoke of the war that had ended his career, of the order he had refused, of the tribunal that had stripped him of rank and honor. The Shadow Fang never responded, but it never left either. Its steady breathing at night felt more constant than any friend he had kept since leaving the Corps. He began calling it Nyx. The name slipped out one night when the creature's scales shimmered like living shadow in the firelight. It fit, and once spoken it could not be taken back. But Nyx was not the only watcher. Above the treetops more drones had arrived. Some circled high in orbit, others skulked like insects between branches, their lenses trained on every interaction. Elias noticed one when it glinted wrong against the morning sun. He shot it down with a single precise shot, but the damage was done. He knew the council had seen enough. And indeed they had. On worlds light years away, feeds were dissected frame by frame. A human tending a Shadow Fang's wounds. A human sharing food. A human firing not on the predator but on its rival. Elder voices, shrill with fear, filled the chambers. Apex predators were supposed to embody the Council's warning to all species. The wild is chaos, only we bring order. If a human could make a myth bow its head, then what was left of their authority? Hunters were dispatched. Elite, merciless, bred to destroy the predators that haunted Council-controlled worlds. Their orders were precise. Kill the beast, kill the human, broadcast the death to every system. Fear must be restored. Elias did not know the ships were already on their way. He only knew Nyx was healing, and that each night he felt less like a man hiding on the edge of civilization and more like a man standing on the cusp of something larger than himself. He watched Nyx test its weight, pace the perimeter, even circle him when he walked as if guarding. The thought terrified him more than it comforted, because guardianship implied bond, and bond implied permanence. One evening as he cleaned his rifle, Nyx prowled back into camp carrying the limp body of a horned reptile twice Elias's size. It dropped the kill at his feet, then sat back on its haunches. The gesture was unmistakable. A gift. Elias stared at the carcass, at the beast that offered it, and laughter escaped him before he could stop it. The sound was rough, cracked but real. He had not laughed in years. The bond had deepened whether he wanted it or not. He could no longer deny it. He was no longer just a man feeding a wounded animal. He was something more dangerous, something that would shake the galaxy once discovered. A partner. The moment of peace did not last. One night, a hum pierced the air, low at first but building to a steady thrum. Elias's gut twisted. He knew that sound, the engines of dropships. He grabbed his pack, slung his rifle and hissed, "Move." Nyx's ears flicked, body tense, eyes fixed on the canopy. The shadows above rippled as searchlights cut through the forest. Hunters had come. Elias felt the old soldier in him snap awake, every nerve firing with a clarity he hadn't felt since the battlefield. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for Nyx, for the impossible bond he had forged, for the proof that humanity was something the Council had never accounted for. As the first searchlight sliced across the camp, Nyx's lips curled, fangs gleaming. Elias steadied his rifle. Together, man and beast prepared to face the storm. And far above, in silent council chambers filled with terrified whispers, entire civilizations leaned closer to the screens. They had no idea which one to fear more, the predator or the human who stood beside it. The dropships descended with a shriek that split the night, their engines stirring the trees like a hurricane. Elias crouched low, rifle snug against his shoulder, watching the firelight die beneath the artificial glare of search beams. Nyx was a shadow beside him, muscles coiled, its breathing steady but charged with violence. The Council's hunters had come, and they would not leave until either the predator or the man lay broken in the dirt. They landed with military precision, boots striking earth in unison. The hunters moved like a single organism, armor matte black, visors glowing with the dull light of targeting arrays. Their rifles gleamed with shock rounds meant to cripple even the largest beasts. Nets studded with razor filaments hung ready on their belts. These were not ordinary soldiers. They had been trained since birth for one purpose: exterminating apex predators. To them, Nyx was not a mystery or miracle. It was a target. And Elias was collateral. Human, a voice barked through an amplifier, harsh and metallic. Step away from the creature. Compliance may preserve your life. The order was as cold as the forest air. Elias could almost laugh at the absurdity. They thought he was afraid of death. They thought he would betray the only companion he had left. He rose just enough for the light to catch him, rifle leveled squarely on their leader. Not happening. A ripple of static answered, then silence. The hunters exchanged a glance through their visors. Then the leader lifted a hand and three broke formation, spreading wide to encircle the clearing. The others advanced, shock rifles humming with energy. Elias's finger brushed the trigger. His mind was quiet, the way it had been in the core before the tribunal ruined him. He counted steps, calculated angles, and waited for the storm to break. It did. The first hunter lunged, net arcing through the air. Nyx roared, a sound that ripped through Elias's chest like thunder. The beast moved with terrifying speed, a blur of muscle and shadow. The net never touched its hide. Instead, the hunter vanished beneath claws that carved through armor like paper. A spray of sparks and blood lit the ground. Chaos erupted. Hunters shouted, rifles flared, and the clearing became a battlefield. Elias dropped the first he saw, a clean shot through the visor that left the alien convulsing before collapsing. He pivoted, shifted, fired again. Years of training flowed back into his body as natural as breathing. But it wasn't just him. Nyx fought at his side as though it understood every movement. When Elias shifted left, the predator surged right, tearing down the flanker before the alien could line up a shot. When Elias dove for cover, Nyx leapt over him, intercepting a barrage of fire that might have ended him. Together they were chaos incarnate. Man and monster, soldier and apex, bound by some unspoken language that no council doctrine had prepared for. The hunters faltered. Their formation broke. Their numbers thinned with every passing breath. Elias felt the tide turning, but he also felt the eyes, those damn drones, recording everything. Somewhere across the stars, elders were watching, their fear mounting with each hunter that fell. One of the aliens, cornered and desperate, tore a communicator from his belt. His voice shrieked in a language Elias barely knew, but the meaning was clear enough, calling fire from above. Orbital strike. The kind of solution the council loved, impersonal, absolute, indiscriminate. Damn it, Elias muttered. He shot the communicator, but the signal had already gone. High above, the sky rumbled with the promise of annihilation. Nyx snarled at the heavens, tail lashing, body tense. Elias felt the vibration of incoming ordnance before he saw it, columns of light searing through the clouds. The ground shook. Trees erupted into flame. The air filled with smoke and ash. He grabbed what little gear he could, shouting, "Move!" Nyx needed no urging. Together they plunged into the forest, weaving through trunks as fire fell behind them. Explosions lit the night in bursts of white, heat searing their backs. Elias stumbled more than once, lungs burning, but Nyx stayed beside him, nudging him forward with its massive body whenever he faltered. They reached a ravine just as another strike obliterated the camp they had left. Elias looked back once, watching the place where fire and ash consumed the clearing. The hunters were gone. Their bodies had been swallowed by the council's fury, erased like they had never existed. Only Elias and Nyx remained. For a moment, they crouched together in the shadow of the ravine, smoke curling above them. Elias's chest heaved, sweat and soot painting his face. Nyx stood still, head high, as if daring the sky to strike again. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, not with rage but with certainty. It had chosen its path. Elias reached out, his hand brushing against the creature's flank. The heat of its body burned through his palm. He realized then that whatever bound them was no accident. He had spared it when every instinct told him to kill. He had fed it when hunger could have devoured him. Now it had returned that trust in blood and fire. Somewhere far above, the council would twist this into heresy. They would call him an abomination, a corrupter of nature, a traitor to the order they enforced across the stars. But to Elias the truth was simpler. He was no longer alone. The night swallowed the flames. The forest whispered again, cautious but alive. Elias leaned against Nyx's side, rifle still in hand, mind racing. The council would not stop. They had seen too much. They would send more ships, more soldiers, more fire until nothing remained. But something had shifted in him. He no longer thought only of survival. He thought of what the galaxy had seen, of the fear in the hunter's eyes, of the way Nyx had fought beside him as if they were one. The council believed fear belonged to them. Maybe it didn't anymore. Elias closed his eyes, listening to Nyx's steady breathing. Tomorrow would bring pursuit. Tomorrow would bring war. But tonight, man and predator had stood against the council's hunters and endured. That was enough. And far across the galaxy, millions watched the footage in silence, realizing the impossible had happened. The most feared predator in known space had fought not against a human but with him. The question now spread like wildfire. If one man could do this, what else might humanity achieve? The council's war was no longer against a single soldier or a single beast. It was against the idea of what they had witnessed. An idea too dangerous to contain. The first sparks of rebellion had already begun to catch. The days after the hunter strike bled into one another, each dawn marked by smoke still curling from the horizon and each night haunted by the low drone of surveillance craft circling high above. Elias had known pursuit before, but this was different. This was not a patrol or a bounty squad. This was the full weight of the Galactic Council pressing down on one man and one beast, determined to erase an image they could not afford to let spread. Yet spread it did. The recordings of the battle leaked from the drones before the council could contain them. Frontier systems whispered first, then outer colonies, then entire networks of smugglers, dissidents, and exiles. Screens flickered in hidden bars, showing the impossible. A shadow fang tearing apart armored hunters not in chaos, but in rhythm with a human who fought at its side. The rumor took root faster than any law could strangle it. Some called Elias a lunatic, others a heretic, but many more called him proof. Proof that humans, newcomers to the galactic stage, were different from every species before them. Elias did not see the whispers. He saw only the trails of ash where Council bombers had scoured the land, only the red marks etched into his scanner where patrols closed in. Nyx padded beside him always, healed enough now that its stride carried no limp. At times Elias caught himself watching it, marveling at the fluid grace of each movement, the way its ears flicked at dangers long before he heard them. He told himself the bond was tactical, that survival was easier with two. But in the quiet between explosions he admitted another truth. He could not imagine walking this world alone anymore. One evening when the sun dipped into a bruised horizon, Nyx returned from its prowl dragging the carcass of a beast Elias couldn't name. Its claws were cracked, its muzzle still wet with blood, but its eyes glowed faintly as it dropped the offering at his feet. Elias touched his chest, startled by the warmth that welled there. A soldier once, a ghost after, he had not been chosen by anyone in years. Now he had been chosen by something the council itself feared. He cleaned his rifle by the fire and spoke into the night. You know they'll keep coming. They won't stop until we're ash. You understand that, don't you? Nyx's gaze met his, steady, unflinching. No sound came but the answer was clear. It would not run. Neither would he. Far beyond that ravine, in palaces of glass and silver, the council raged. They had unleashed hunters and lost them. They had unleashed fire and still the human lived. Their propaganda called Elias a corrupter, a demon who twisted nature to his will. Yet for every broadcast they controlled, dozens of underground feeds spread the opposite. The more they condemned him, the more mythic he became. Frontier settlers raised to fear the wilderness began to look differently at the predators outside their domes. If a human could stand beside one, why couldn't they? The council's solution was escalation. No longer would small squads be enough. They mobilized regiments. War machines rolled from foundries, fleets fueled for deployment. Their decree was absolute. The human Elias Kane and the predator called Nyx must be destroyed before the contagion of defiance spread further. Elias noticed the change long before he saw the armies. Patrols grew heavier, skies darker with craft, ground-shaking quakes echoing from distant armor columns. Nyx bristled at the vibrations, hackles lifting as if the land itself groaned under the council's weight. Elias studied maps stolen from downed drones, traced paths through valleys, and set traps where he could. He knew a direct fight meant death. But he also knew he was no longer fighting for himself alone. He was fighting for an idea that had already slipped beyond his grasp, an idea now swelling across systems like wildfire. Their first ambush was brutal in its simplicity. A squad of soldiers tracked them into a canyon, confident in their nets and shock rifles. Elias waited until their boots echoed just right, then triggered charges set beneath the rock face. Stone collapsed, splitting the squad. Before they could regroup, Nyx dropped from above, claws carving through armor. Elias's rifle cracked sharp in the chaos, each shot deliberate, each breath in sync with the beast at his side. When silence returned, the canyon floor was slick with ruin. He knew the drones recorded every second. He wanted them to. The footage spread faster than he could move. Soldiers, once the hand of the council, were seen routed by a man and an apex predator. Citizens who had lived lifetimes under the shadow of fear now questioned what that fear was worth. The council tightened its grip, but every fist clenched too tight only bled faster. Rumors rose of colonies refusing conscription, of outposts where predators were no longer hunted but watched, even fed. Elias felt the tide shifting though he tried not to think of it. He thought only of survival, only of the next campfire and the next horizon. Yet when he woke to find Nyx pressed against him, scales warm against the chill, he understood his life had become something larger. He was no longer drifting from one contract to another. He was at the center of a storm. The storm broke one night under a silver moon. A column of council soldiers advanced into the valley below, armor glinting, weapons humming. At their front walked a war machine 3 stories tall, its frame bristling with cannons. Elias crouched on the ridge, rifle cradled, eyes tracing weak points. Nyx crouched beside him, tail lashing silently. "You ready?" Elias whispered, though he knew the answer. The Shadowfang's muscles bunched. Its jaws parted in a silent snarl. Then, as if on command, they moved. The battle that followed was not just survival. It was declaration. Elias fired first, precise shots cutting through command officers. Nyx leapt into the fray, a blur of fury tearing through steel. Soldiers broke ranks, cries echoing against stone as their formation collapsed under the assault of something they did not understand. The war machine turned its guns, but Elias had studied it. Charges placed earlier ripped into its legs, sending it staggering. Nyx climbed its frame, claws screeching against metal, and tore into the cockpit with a roar that silenced the battlefield. When the smoke cleared, Elias stood on the ridge with Nyx at his side, both bloodied, both unbroken. Below lay the wreckage of a force meant to crush them utterly. Above, drones circled, their lenses wide, recording every detail. Elias let them. He wanted the galaxy to see. That night, as the fires burned low, Elias sat with Nyx beside him. He watched the stars shimmer through the smoke and wondered how many eyes stared back through screens across systems. He wondered how many hearts now beat faster at the sight of man and predator fighting as one. The council would call it blasphemy, treason, terror. But others would call it hope. He rested a hand on Nyx's shoulder, the scales warm and solid beneath his palm. "We've started something, haven't we?" The predator huffed softly, leaning into his touch as if answering yes. Across the galaxy, rebellions whispered louder, and soldiers hesitated at orders they once obeyed blindly. The council still had fleets, still had armies, still had power that could crush worlds. But power without fear was brittle. And fear was slipping from their grasp. Elias knew they would not stop until either he was ash or they were dust. He also knew he no longer walked that path alone. The galaxy trembled, and tomorrow it would burn brighter still. The storm of rebellion had swelled beyond Elias's control. What had begun as one man feeding a wounded predator in the shadows of a ravine now burned across entire sectors. Colonists rose against their overseers, predators once culled were spared and studied, and the idea that humans could forge bonds where others saw only monsters became a contagion no decree could silence. But the council was not a creature that bled and died so easily. It was a vast organism, ancient, paranoid, and it had decided that Elias Kane and the Shadow Fang at his side must be annihilated in a way so absolute that no legend could grow from the ashes. The fleet came at dawn. Elias saw the sky turn black with carriers, the air quivering under their engines. Nyx's head lifted sharply, ears pricked, nostrils flaring at the scent of ozone and fire. The earth itself seemed to bow beneath the arrival of that armada. They had not come to hunt. They had come to end. Elias tightened the strap on his rifle and studied the horizon. He had fought before, had ambushed, had survived. But this was different. The council was committing legions. There would be no stealth, no hiding. The truth slammed into him like a physical blow. Today was not about survival. It was about what the galaxy would remember. Nyx moved closer, scales brushing his arm. Its golden eyes met his with that uncanny steadiness he had come to rely on. It was not asking for reassurance. It was telling him it understood. Elias's throat tightened. "We may not walk out of this," he whispered. "But if we burn, they'll choke on the smoke." The first strike fell like a god's hammer. Orbital cannons spat fire, reducing entire ridges to molten glass. Shockwaves toppled trees and sent walls of dust screaming across the valleys. Elias and Nyx moved through that chaos with grim precision, using trenches and ruins as cover, striking at scouts foolish enough to break ahead of the main force. Each engagement was brutal, short, decisive. Elias's shots found weak points as if guided by instinct, while Nyx struck with a speed and ferocity no soldier could match. Together they carved a wound in the council's advance, but each moment brought the noose tighter. The battlefield became a storm of iron and blood. War machines the size of fortresses rolled across the plain, their cannons raking fire. Fighters screamed overhead. Yet the more overwhelming the force, the sharper Elias's resolve became. He fought not as a fugitive but as a symbol, every trigger pull carrying the weight of colonies watching, of rebels rising, of children who might one day believe predators could be allies, not terrors. Nyx fought like fury incarnate. It leapt onto tanks, claws sparking as it tore through armor, jaws crushing through alloy and flesh alike. Its roar became a war cry that carried across the field, shaking the courage of trained soldiers. Elias felt the sound in his bones, and for a heartbeat he believed they might do the impossible. But the council had prepared for that belief. Out of the smoke lumbered a shape unlike any other, an engineered colossus, a predator designed in secret laboratories, built not to hunt but to destroy. Twice the size of Nyx, plated in living armor, its eyes burned with synthetic rage. The council had created a mirror, a monster to slay a monster. The two beasts collided in a thunderclap of claws and teeth. Nyx struck first, fast and cunning, but the engineered juggernaut met it with raw power, hurling the Shadow Fang across the battlefield. The ground shook as Nyx scrambled back to its feet, blood already darkening its scales. Elias fired at the beast, his rounds sparking harmlessly off its plating. It was built for this. built to make Nyx bleed. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but Elias stood his ground. He sprinted through falling fire, drawing the creature's attention with volleys from his rifle. Its gaze shifted, cannons mounted along its shoulders whirring toward him. Elias dove into cover just as the blasts obliterated the stone behind him. He reloaded, mind racing, eyes darting for weaknesses. And then he saw it, vents along the creature's flank, glowing faintly as it burned its reserves. "Nyx," he shouted, pointing. The Shadowfang's eyes followed his gesture. With a guttural snarl, it lunged again, weaving under the Titan's strike and slamming its claws deep into those vents. Sparks erupted, smoke hissing. The beast roared in pain, thrashing, but Nyx clung with feral determination. Elias emptied his rifle into the glowing wounds, each shot driving deeper, until the colossus staggered, shrieking in metallic agony. The explosion tore the air apart. Fire billowed high as the engineered monster collapsed in ruin, its frame twisting and shrieking before finally stilling. Nyx stumbled from the wreckage, blood streaking its hide, one leg dragging. Elias ran to it, heart hammering, dropping to his knees at its side. "You're still with me," he breathed, pressing a hand to its chest. He felt the ragged rise and fall beneath his palm. Nyx leaned its head against him, eyes dim but burning with the same unyielding bond that had carried them this far. Above, the fleet trembled. The Council had thrown its secret weapon and lost. Drones broadcast the sight across every channel, a human kneeling beside a wounded predator, victorious against the impossible. What was meant to crush hope had only fanned it into an inferno. Across the galaxy the image spread, man and beast side by side, unbroken. The Council, in their gleaming halls, watched in horror as rebellion ignited into revolution. Their fleets were vast, their weapons endless, but power built on fear had fractured. The legend of Elias Kane and Nyx could not be erased now. It was no longer just a man and a predator. It was a story, one stronger than any empire. On the battlefield, Elias helped Nyx to its feet. The predator leaned heavily against him, but its gaze was steady, unyielding. Fires raged around them, ships screamed overhead, but for a moment all Elias felt was a strange calm. He had begun this as a man stumbling through exile, haunted and hollow. Now he stood at the center of a myth, chosen by a creature the galaxy had feared, and together they had reshaped destiny. He lifted his rifle, scanning the horizon. "We're not finished yet," he murmured. Nyx growled low, as if in agreement, and they moved forward, two shadows against the blaze of a crumbling order. The galaxy would remember what happened next, not as a battle, not as a rebellion, but as the moment everything changed. The Council had feared one human feeding one predator. Now they feared what billions might do once they realized predators and prey were no longer bound by the old rules. Elias and Nyx had cracked the foundation of an empire. And as the fires spread, the galaxy trembled at what would rise from the ruins.